Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door launched in 2004 on the GameCube as the sequel to Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64. Personally, it's the only Paper Mario game I didn't play in or around its launch in any capacity. After the Nintendo 64 game didn't grip me that one day we rented it, I had little to no interest in playing its sequel. I merely knew it existed. After I purchased the 64 game on the Virtual Console, I was probably open to the idea of playing Thousand Year Door, but if I recall correctly, I don't think it came to my mind too much. In 2010, I discovered YouTube Let's Player Chugga Conroy. When I found him, I watched through all of his playthroughs of games I was somewhat familiar with. This included Thousand Year Door. I watched through the whole thing and decided to find the game for myself. I played it for the first time in late 2010, and funnily enough, that's my only playthrough of the game that had no relation to hat-wearing gamer. I streamed it in 2013, Let's Played it in 2014, and recorded a playthrough in 2022 for this video. I can't say I don't enjoy it, especially since the first 3 playthroughs were purely for fun, but it does strike me that it took my own channel's existence to want to pick it up again. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. Instead, I'm going to cover it just like I did the first one. I'm Hat-Wearing Gamer, and this is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Also, play the game first. It won't be an easy video to follow if you haven't. I'm going to start by addressing something I don't like. There's one huge problem I have with Thousand Year Door. It's seemingly a small problem that could be fixed really quick, but it's all over the game. From right where you hop off the boat and enter Rogueport for the first time, right up until you fight the Shadow Queen, it's there. Mario's walking speed. First time I played this game, and every time since, I feel it right from the get-go. Mario is so slow in this game. He moves at a snail's pace. I see this speed alongside the Nintendo 64 game and feel so incredibly sluggish, and the lack of a spin dash doesn't help. Now, I gotta address the elephant in the room, and that is the game's 4th partner, the Yoshi kid who lets you ride him. There is a huge speed increase, but I still feel the slowness a lot because I find it hard to keep him out. I only really find him all that useful for speed in Rogueport, the Glitz Pit, and the Excess Express, and that's before I have to keep hopping off him to walk through doors. There's more to say about him, but I'll save that for later. On top of the movement speed issue, the pacing in general can often slow to a crawl, and there's one very important reason for this, and that is backtracking. You have to run laps up and down almost every single area you visit. Chapter 1's backtracking isn't too bad because you essentially run from one end, where you enter Pale Meadows and where the castle is, all the way through Paleberg up to Tronk Fortress and back. Chapter 2 is when things start getting a tad annoying. From the start to the tree to flurry to the start to flurry to the tree. Chapter 3 has you running all over the Glitz Pit, but due to the nature of the chapter, it doesn't feel too bad, and what bad there is saved by one of the game's greatest qualities, which I'll dive into later. Chapter 4 forces you to run through the Twilight Trail 5 times, and it feels especially obnoxious after the second visit to the steeple, going back to the town to do nothing more than name drop Dupless just for him to run back to the steeple. Gee whiz, that feels like such a waste of time! Chapter 5 has you running through Keelhaul Key's jungle a bunch of times, though at least this one is shorter than the Twilight Trail. But it doesn't help after the chapter when the game sends you back to the island to find Frankie's wedding ring. Chapter 6 is similar to 3 with running up and down the train, but due to the nature of the chapter, it doesn't feel that bad, and as well, is saved by one of the game's best qualities. Now, Chapter 7, Merciful Heavens, why? The game sends you on a wild goose chase to find General White, a bob-omb you meet in Paleberg in Chapter 1, so first off, good luck if you remember who that guy was, and second, you go somewhere, you're told he's somewhere else, you go somewhere else, you're told he's elsewhere, and so on until you have nothing, go back to Far Outpost and find him there. There's a similar mission in the N64 game with a letter trail that leads to a badge, but it's far less of a problem there because 1, it's a side quest, 2, you can do it slowly as you play the adventure, and 3, it has a bit of novelty. I will grant that General White's hunt was played off like a bit of a joke, but I think it would have landed better if the rest of the game leading up had a tad less footwork, meaning the overall experience might be less frustrating. Also, you have to find Gold Bob 2 and Poshley Heights, which just adds fuel to the fire. Aside from the short trip back after fighting Gloomtail, Chapter 8 has no backtracking, so good on ya! So much of this backtracking could have been saved with things like shorter paths, relocating key conversations, some areas being less linear, and having a spin dash. There are a few other downsides in the game, but they all go hand in hand with other topics, so I'll cover them as I go. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. Thousand Year Door's battle system has the same level of simplicity as a Nintendo 64 game where every damage point counts, but it expands a fair bit. The biggest thing is the audience. Aesthetically, it adds a bit of pizzazz to the battles, but also links to the battles mechanically. Audience cheers recharge the star power gauge, and you can even egg them on in that direction by using stylish commands while attacking, or the appeal function if one wants to recharge the star power gauge without attacking. Additionally, the partners now have more utility attached to them. They have badges and they can use items, adding tactical opportunities. As well, they have their own HP values, which adds more depth and complexity. It does bum me out seeing their deaths usurp a life stream though, when I would always rather that go to Mario. There are a few other small things like enemies using items, which just adds more to it, and action commands for first strikes both given and received, and the special moves. The special moves, i.e. the ones that use the crystal stars, have action commands. This, I think, greatly improves the special moves from the first game since you now have more control over how successful they are. With more control, I feel more inclined to use all of them at various times up to my discretion. Still some more than others, but I would use them all more. On the downside, I find the stage hazards to be more annoying than fun. It always puts a damper on me seeing Mario miss attacks, get frozen or whacked in the head because the stage said he should. I can't say it's unbalanced because it happens to the opposition too, as well it hasn't killed me in recorded footage. Mechanically, every boss has a similar structure, the structure being that you can attack a main spot at more or less any time. A main spot being either a weak spot on the boss or just hitting the boss themselves. Sometimes there are other things you can do to the boss to make them easier, like disabling their additional health. Of course, though that's true of all of them, they're still not all that similar to each other. Hooktail can be weakened by an attack effects badge, something that was only merely cosmetic in the first game. Grubber can infinitely power himself up, Cortez has pirate weapons, and the Smorgs can present any shape as support. I can't say too much about Dupless mechanically since he's really just an enemy to hit, but what makes his battle special is the narrative, which I'll get into later. The two weaker battles in the game are the ones against Magnus von Crumple. Lord Crump does send out a few accessories, but it's still just paring him down to defeat. That's not to say the battles are bad, they're just weak by comparison. There is of course a final boss, but I'll be talking about that later. The partners have a lot of new things to them in terms of abilities, backstory and personality. Starting with the weakest partner, I don't find Florrie too useful in battle. Her ability outside of battle is weird in both function and telegraphs to do it. Plus also, I don't really find her aesthetically appealing to look at, which means I don't tend to keep her out unless I need to use her. Ms. Mouse offers a unique place in battles with stealing items from enemies, although since she's optional and doesn't become available until later in the game, I don't find myself using her too often. Goombella is almost functionally identical to Goombario, but her characterization of being a young passionate uni student well contextualizes why she seems to know everything. And on top of that, she doesn't know everything. Every time she tells, she gets out a book and looks up the foe. It makes a lot of sense for her rather than being a random Goomba who knows everything. The Yoshi Kid, or the name I always give him, Dieglos. It's a long story, if I had the string VOD I would share it. I've already touched on his usage outside of battle regarding his speed, but he can also get you across pits, so he's basically a faster para-carry. But in battle, he can only do so much. The ground pound move hits many times for 1 point each, which is useless with even 1 point of defense. The rest of his moves I find are too time consuming or expensive, but in here we see the real origin of Yoshi's final smash in Smash Ultimate, not the melee intro. Koops is Koopa with a few extra gadgets. Not bad gadgets, but I don't think they're pushed very far. I feel like there could be so much more interesting puzzle solving that comes with holding down the button and keeping him in place. Bobbery is like Bombette, but a little better. He can be thrown up ledges and has a cool backstory, and brings more attack variety rather than just exploding at different levels. The last partner is my favourite partner, Vivian. Her field ability is hiding in the shadows, which is almost the same as Bo's from the first game, but there are a few more applications for it. Now in battle, she is powerful. She can light up any non-fire based enemy, which keeps burning them for a few more turns, and she can do every enemy in one go. The FP cost of Fiery Jinx is a bit much, but I find it's worth it, and especially gets better when it really does dirty on some enemy tactics. Upgrading partners comes in Shine Sprites rather than Super Blocks. Shine Sprites add an extra layer to the upgrade by gathering 3 of them and taking them to Merlin in Rogueport and upgrading there. I kinda get a tad annoyed by it because once I have 3 sprites I'm left thinking, I have to wait until I get back to Rogueport to upgrade. I could leave and return to Rogueport, but with how much backtracking there already is, I'm left preferring not to do that, and not even every chapter accommodates going back to Rogueport. It might have been nice to upgrade upon collecting a 3rd sprite, and if players don't want to upgrade, they don't have to collect them, just like the super blocks, or even keeping the sprite saved in the pause menu until you want to use it. There are also the curses, which I really see as partner abilities without a partner. That's by no means a bad thing. After all, the last one gives Sushi's field ability without having the unnecessary fish partner attached to it, and I think it's a fair outlook to give the other ones also. The curses themselves are good. The plane is for mobility and comes with its own engaging mechanical challenge. The paper curse is not only for progress but also opens up shortcuts, mainly back to the door, which is essential given that you have to walk to it several times. Tube is okay. It's not a bad power up, but I find it sometimes a tad obnoxious to activate. And the ship on its own doesn't offer much aside from simply traversing water, but the level design in the water is what makes it interesting. Jumping and hammer present upgrades as well, both in the field and in battle. The Super Boots are functionally the same as the Nintendo 64 game, but the Ultra Boots introduce higher jumping, allowing Mario to grab onto small overhanging pipes or bars. I did find something weird about seeing it in Paper Mario, but Mario himself has done this before in the platformers, so it works. Hammers are similar, but different. The Super Hammer brings the swing, requiring analog stick spinning, which mirrors the high jump performed by the same controller action. Much like the Tube, I find these hard to perform because you start spinning the analog stick and it doesn't do anything due to failed setup with the A or B buttons respectively. In battle, the upgrades increase the jump and hammer attack power respectively like they do in the Nintendo 64 game, but they also add moves. The moves cost FP but can add moves to players who like badges. I think the easy accessibility of the moves is made up for in how tricky some of the moves are to perform. I think the super jump is the only one where I have an easy time performing the action commands. The partner abilities in the field, cursors, and the jump and hammer upgrades expands Mario's utility across the game while exploring the world. And the great thing about it is that there aren't many things that are underutilized. When it comes to exploring the world at large, sadly there's a disconnect across areas because of a lot of pipe travel. Chapters 1, 2, 4, and 7 are all traveled to via pipe in the sewers. It works as an excuse to put a travel spot to any location without breaking the world, but it still leaves places feeling separated from each other. The best thing they do is decorate the pipe according to where they're going. The first game only had this happen once and incentivizes you to explore the Toad Town tunnels regardless of how much tunnel exploration you've done up to this point. Now you certainly are incentivized to explore Rogueport sewers, but the big incentive to see it is through the Thousand Year Door itself. Since you're forced there early game, you discover things to look around for. Chapters 1 and 7 can easily have paths from Rogueport. Chapter 4 makes sense to have a pipe given the nature of getting to it. And Chapter 2 can still work with a pipe, but maybe one or both of these pipes can be above ground to add some colour. The side content in this game is rich, but some of it can be hard to stumble into. The Trouble Center is a spot for all the random side and fetch quests that'll get you a few bucks on your adventure. I don't tend to do them just because they seem rather out of the way, and when you find them, suddenly you have a ton of side quests you can do, and all I'm seeing is a to-do list and thinking, meh. The star pieces are back from the first game, and they're not too different from the Nintendo 64 game in regards to hiding places and rewards. After finishing Chapter 3, it's possible to return to the Glitz Pit and battle your way from rank 20 up through Champion, which I don't really do, but it's just cool if you enjoy Chapter 3 that much. If you would prefer a more challenging line of battles, this game introduces the Pit of 100 Trials. 100 battles that progressively get harder as you go and reward you with a powerful badge that results in always guarding. I've personally only ever done it once, and it's my recorded playthrough. That said, I wasn't even going to finish it, I just wanted to start it for footage, and then I ended up finishing the whole thing. It wasn't too bad, but takes a lot of commitment. Now, the best part of this game, which goes hand in hand with talking through all the chapters, is the character. And I don't just mean the characters, though that is part of it, I mean the character of the game. Everything and everyone is interesting. In the earlier video on the Nintendo 64 game, I briefly went over the character of it, but this game takes that and turns it up to 11. I briefly went into some of the partner characters earlier, like Goombella, but there's also Professor Frankly, your local research and scientist character, but also just happens to be one of Goombella's university teachers. You know, that one character who just happens to know everything or is able to find info about anything? That's him. It seems a bit flat, but I think it works because he's contextualized appropriately, much like Goombella. In fact, there's one part where he doesn't know the answer, and he has to research before he can tell you what to do to progress. In that time, you just chill, I don't know, walk around, do a side quest or something. It is weird that there's offices in Rogueport of all places rather than New Goom, but I do realize that it would require putting New Goom into the game somehow, and that could possibly add more walking to get to his office, which would add more to my rage over the slowness of the game. Speaking of the location, Rogueport is dressed up very well. It lives up to the name by being full of lawless hacks who seek to only serve themselves. There's graffiti and garbage spread all over the place to build the atmosphere. A lot of the locals are either rich living on the higher end with a certain disregard for others, or poor living in rubbish piles full of flies while being slightly on edge. Even when you meet Goombella and run into Toadsworth at the start of the game sets a tone of Rogueport with a background scene showing two societies running into each other over a money dispute. The game could completely get away with not putting that scene in, but so much care is taken to show what Rogueport is all about.
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
I can't say there's anything too drastic about Petal Meadows, but I think that's okay since it's the first chapter. Petalburg has some fun characters, but the main one of note is Koops, who later becomes a partner. He wants to come with Mario to defeat Hooktail for a multitude of reasons, including revenge for supposedly defeating his father, finishing what his father started, and wanting to change his image in everyone's sight, including his girlfriend Koopy-Koo. Koopy even discourages him from going due to the dangerous reputation of the castle and gets mad at him for still wanting to go, which really shows his determination to prove himself as brave rather than scared. Upon Hooktail's defeat, Koops' dad emerges and returns with them to Petalburg, where due to Koops' acts in the castle and his father's blessing, he's able to more confidently continue adventuring with Mario to grow stronger. Petalburg as well gives Koops their blessing as he takes off with Mario. Peach doesn't have any shocking character moments in the game rather than her just being the typical princess she's always been, but the great addition to the Peach interludes is Tech. Tech considers himself the perfect computer, but is suddenly overwhelmed with what he calls a malfunction at the sight of Peach. He brings Peach to his room when left with the desire to observe Peach. Peach sees this as Tech falling in love with her. Naturally, as a computer, Tech doesn't quite understand what love is, and so Peach tries to explain it to him. He fails to understand Peach's description of love, but is so invested in being a perfect computer that he wants to understand love. Over the course of the game, Tech builds up their relationship through doing tasks, sharing information about the X-Nauts, dancing. He slowly starts to question his loyalty to Grodus as he discovers Grodus' plan and intentions. Since the intention involved Peach being a vessel for the Shadow Queen, something that comes back in the final boss, Tech does everything he can to try and stop the plan. At the end of Chapter 6, Grodus discovers Tech's betrayal and shuts him down, much to Peach's objection, and it all culminates in the end of Chapter 7 where Tech was able to revive himself on backup power and cached memory in order to help Mario, motivated by his love for Peach. The Peach interludes would have been nothing without him. Chapter 2's setting has an incredibly calm atmosphere to it, achieved firstly by its music. The light bells and flute combined with the soft melody gives it this calm mysteriousness. The black tree trunks, white leaves and pink sky add to the mysteriousness through how unusual the colours are and go well with the grey punis. Speaking of, the punis are a species that flee at the sight of anything that looks scary. Subsequently, when the Great Boggly Tree was under threat by the X-Nauts, they were either imprisoned or hid away on their own. Punio was the only one brave enough out of them to leave Boggly Wood seeking help from anyone who would listen. His early actions still show his fear, much like the rest of the Punies, but he does show initiative by venturing out into the big bad world outside Boggly Woods to seek help. This element of his character isn't explored sadly, so it's hard to know how intentional it was, but I like to think that this was the case for him. Puniper does raise some skepticism when it comes to trusting Mario, which furthers the idea that Punio trusts him. Punio also discovers that his sister, Petuni, was kidnapped and imprisoned along with most of the other Punies. I personally like the idea that this kidnapping and Punio's love for his sister is what motivates Punio to seek help, but since he doesn't know about the kidnapping, I take it more as a love for his species and home. The Punies grow to trust Mario as he rescues the imprisoned ones, including the Elder. The Elder, of course, being a senile, typical old person-like character. She's hypercritical of all the young ones and won't let Lord Crump have his way in a comical tone. I think the best part about the Punies is that they not only come to trust Mario, but they also help him progress towards the Crystal Star, take down the X-Nauts, and get back their tree and home. They overcame their fear of something big and found help. Now, our glorious villain gang, the X-Nauts, are somewhat generic when it comes to bad guys, but their leader Grodus has a level of mysteriousness to him. He's kidnapped Peach and has given very explicit instructions that she is to remain completely unharmed. Not just something like keeping her alive as a ransom, but demanding absolutely zero damage to her body. As discussed in the Spiel of Tech, this culminates in the end where Peach's body was to be used as a vessel for the Shadow Queen, something revealed in the final boss. But that's the point. Until then, you're kept in the dark about what Peach is used for. Adding to the mysteriousness of them, the X-Naut Fortress is based on the moon. It opens up several questions surrounding how they built it there, how they traveled there, and how they got Peach there. Satisfyingly, some of those are answered with the teleporter that takes Mario back to Rogueport. I can appreciate other elements of Grodus' evilness, like abandoning Lord Crump in the X-Naut Fortress for it to blow up with him and Mario in there, but although these are good, Grodus and the X-Nauts do seem rather tame compared to the rest of the game. I wouldn't hold it against them, because if in a class of 10 students, one student scores 95% while the others score 97 to 99%, 95 might be the lowest mark, but 95% is still really good. Chapter 3 sees Mario and company going to Glitzville and participating in the Glitz Pit fighting arena. This was the point where a chapter didn't just contain some external exploration and a dungeon. There arguably is no dungeon and very little exploration. Instead, playing in a fighting competition and working your way up through the ranks to become champion after seeing the Crystal Star is on the champion's belt. Of course, the chapter goes in 1.5 million different directions that you weren't quite prepared for, because from the start, it just seems at base level the entire chapter is playing through a competition, and technically you do it. But there's a whole mystery to uncover in the process. It's teased early on by Bandy Andy and his 7 wonders of the Glitz Pit, hinting at things to come. And in the Major League, Jolene begins to trust Mario and carries out her plan to take down Grubber through him by leaving hints and key items around the place. And due to her actions, sometimes the game makes her look like the guilty party causing fighters to go missing, even though it was Grubber the whole time. It's revealed in the end that Jolene was motivated by her brother's disappearance to get the job that she has and start investigating from the inside. This is the first chapter where it's not just a few characters that are interesting and have a cool backstory. This is a place where things get real, and it's not just a trek to get inside the dungeon and solve its puzzles, it's a full-on mystery. And I didn't even mention that the contest itself isn't treated so mindlessly too. You actually make friends in the chapter, like King K in the minor league. He's such a chill dude and just chats to you like a bro. He shows you around the other minor league players who would otherwise put you off. When he seemingly leaves the comp, things feel a tad empty. And a stark contrast is shown in the Major League when no one shows any proactive interest in talking to you. Even the Yoshi Kid partner, who will always be out when this moment happens, calls out the lack of hospitality from the other Major League players. After the Peach interludes, we have the Bowser interludes. Bowser acts as a goofy comic relief villain that is too late to get Mario and stuffs up everything. After a chapter, he's seen in the chapter before having a small narrative in that area. He either does a short classic level or walks around and talks to NPCs. One favourite line of dialogue I have is, "I am Bowser, businessman of legend, fear my accounting!" The only part of his narrative that has me in questions is his sudden appearance in the Glitz Pit in chapter 3. It kind of wrecks the idea that Bowser is a chapter behind Mario and makes you wonder how Bowser failed getting up to it in the interlude after chapter 4, given that he would have been up there before. Chapter 4 brings a narrative where Mario's name gets stolen. Okay, how often does something like that happen? It becomes physically impossible for Mario to say his own name with his name and image stolen. It's closer to identity theft than what identity theft actually is. Dupless takes Mario's name and physicality, which means he loses almost everything about himself. No one knows who he is, he can't leave Twilight Town because people are supposed to travel through the pipe with their name written on themselves, and he loses his partners for the rest of the chapter. The partners even turn up as opposition in the boss. The positive drawback to no one knowing who Mario is that he's able to befriend Vivian of the Shadow Sirens, someone who was once an enemy. The Shadow Sirens are a group of 3 characters whom you have multiple encounters with across the game. Early on, Beldam and kind of Marilyn are seen bullying Vivian relentlessly, which leaves Vivian feeling rather down about herself and a bit bitter towards them in spite of her loyalty. She decides to abandon them when she meets Mario, and even when she discovers that Mario is in fact the real Mario, she doesn't want to at first due to Mario initially being her adversary. But this is until she realized that Mario treated her better than Beldam ever did, and so she sticks with him. After Chapter 4, the Shadow Sirens replace Vivian with Dupless, who pops up in later chapters. Now, when I started writing about Chapter 5, it never really dawned on me how many layers there were in that darn thing to the point where I struggled to write about it, but I'll do my best. Chapter 5 shows Mario sailing to Keelhaul Key, an island south of Rogueport. On the surface, the chapter is nothing more than a simple adventure to a tropical island to find treasure and the Crystal Star. But it's the accompanying characters that make it what it is. The 2 key characters are the ship owner Flavio and the navigator Bobbery. Bobbery's narrative starts with his refusal to be a navigator out of distaste to return to the sea. Due to endless voyages in the water, he missed the death of his late wife Scarlet, and as a result, he couldn't stop blaming himself for it. It took the bartender handing over Scarlet's letter to get Bobbery back out into the game and onto a ship, even though that felt rather forced because you can't help but seriously wonder why the bartender withheld the letter from Bobbery to begin with. He said he was too gutless to do it, but I would imagine that handing over the letter so that Bobbery can hear from Scarlet again would help him more than anything, which the game shows it does. Anyway, when he's captured by the ghosts in Keelhaul Key, he almost seemingly dies, but really just falls asleep only to wake up and become a partner. His character arc does end kind of weirdly at this point, but after adventuring with Mario, he does end the game with a desire to go back to the sea, so it does kind of come full circle. Now we come to Flavio. Flavio is a bit of a pathetic egomaniac, full of stories that paint himself in really good light. Whether or not the stories are true, the rest of the crew are, and quite reasonably, sick of hearing about them, especially when they're repeat stories. When they get to the island, Flavio resolves issues of who should do stuff democratically, which works in his favour to begin with since he never allows people a chance to vote on him leaving. Until someone pitches him doing exactly that, and the exasperated way the votes are expressed only goes to show how sick everyone is of Flavio. It's rather hilarious. At the end of the chapter, Lord Crump turns up after disguising himself on the ship that they rode to the island and attacks the rest of the crew. Flavio decides to face the boss Cortez to get his ship in order to counter Lord Crump. He actually guts up and asks Cortez for it, though it becomes easier for him when it turns out that he has the upper hand with the skull gem stolen from Cortez by Flavio's ancestors. This all results in a ship uproar. I love how this exact moment is in a Mario game. You rarely if ever see this kind of thing, like ever. Flavio is still rather full of himself due to having the skull gem that releases Cortez's ship, and can't help but boast himself up over that moment. He's still an egomaniac, but it's still done in a humorous way. Now, nearer to the end of Chapter 5 are these Pianta characters, whom are connected to the Pianta Syndicate. You first meet Don Pianta before Chapter 3 as a means of finding blimp tickets for Glitzville. Being a mafia boss, he shows reluctancy to hand over something unless Mario does something in return. That something is bringing back his daughter Francesca and his underling / her romantic partner Frankie. This short narrative has its own beats and character developments. Mario does bring them over, winning his blimp ticket, but Francesca and Frankie still end up leaving and going to Keelhaul Key, where they're found in Chapter 5. He goes back to the Syndicate for tickets to the Excess Express, but the Don's desire to see his daughter is turned up to 11 at this point, where he's shown with a fever due to Francesca's absence. Mario does bring them back, but not before they have a serious discussion about it. Francesca doesn't want to deal with the Syndicate while Frankie is still fairly loyal, especially when the Don really wants them back and is running a fever for it. Frankie, however, needs to prove his love for Francesca by saying "I love you" to her 100 times. This ends with Frankie actually calling her Francesca rather than endless pet names all the time, something that she always wanted. Francesca agrees to go back to her father, where he passes on the syndicate to Frankie. With the Don happy and retired, Mario gets his Excess Express tickets and is on his way. Chapter 6 is my favourite chapter. First off, the Excess Express is a really funny name for a train full of upper-class snobs, and it's a tad hilarious how it departs from a place like Rogueport, and of course, it lands in Poshley Heights. What more could you want for going in the complete opposite direction of Rogueport in regards to culture and manner? But the main part of the chapter is the train ride. There are no enemies or battling of any kind while riding. It's just walking up and down the train meeting people, but when there are a stack of rich people on a train, what else do you do but write a parody of Murder on the Orient Express? Except of course it's thievery, since that's a tad more child-friendly, but still good for a plotline. There aren't any uninteresting characters, which gives everyone this suspicious flair. You also meet a ghost who kills you if you read his diary. And in the end, the culprit was Duplass impersonating Ziptoad, a celebrity riding the train, a character who also later comes back, writing you a thank you letter for catching his impersonator. Now the boss, though, it turns up to be a parasite found in Riverside Station that kidnaps every passenger on the third day, rather than someone you're expecting beforehand. Typically, a boss that you know nothing about that reveals themselves at the last minute and does almost nothing to you along the way would be something I'm more inclined to criticize. But since, from the start of the chapter, an expectation is set that there would be minimal battling and enemy encounters, it actually works rather well. I like how it flies in the face of player expectations. Poshley Heights very much lives up to its name of being an upper-class town full of mansions and expensive living, as well homes for all the characters met on the train. Now, I couldn't possibly talk about Chapter 6 without mentioning Detective Pennington, now could I? He's a tad rehash of Flavio, sadly, where he talks himself up a lot, but he puts in a more sincere effort than Flavio, even though he gets things wrong in his investigations. He's more of a failure of skill rather than being egotistical. He allows us some nice comic relief and Mario a chance to step up and solve mysteries. He also calls Mario Luigi, which brings me to the next character. Luigi is amazing in this game. He's having his own adventure while Mario's on his. He goes to far out lands, gathers partners, collects MacGuffins with an evil villain to take down and a damsel in distress to rescue. Fans often plead for a Paper Luigi game where players take on this adventure with fan-made cover art and whatnot. I think one of the best parts about it is hearing from the partners themselves and what they have to say about Luigi's actions. Often they're sharing about his stuff-ups on the adventure and they stick with him for reasons other than wanting to actually continue adventuring with him. It sounds like a wacky story to go through, and honestly, if Nintendo did the unthinkable and actually released Paper Luigi officially with this adventure, I would pick it up day one. Chapter 7 features Far Outpost, a Russian-inspired town covered in snow. The Bob-ombs all have aviator hats and speak like a stereotypical Russian trying to speak English. Since Far Outpost is used to get Mario to the moon, it nods to how the Soviet Union was the first nation that got into space, even though this is a trip to the moon, which the United States got to first, but I have a feeling that an American-based town would be far less interesting and wouldn't warrant a snowy area as easily. And lastly, the Palace of Shadow, that is Chapter 8, is dark, edgy, and discomforting. It's really all it needs to be in the lead up to the final boss against the Shadow Queen. The Shadow Queen herself betrays Grotus at the last minute despite him reviving her, showing how reckless and power-hungry she is. Now, I'm going to go back to mechanics for a second. At the start of the final boss, the Shadow Queen fully embraces Peach's body while Mario slowly takes down her health. After a while, the Queen drops the body since she's not used to it and is able to revive herself back up to full health. The game steps out of battle mode for a bit for more of the narrative. In this moment, the Crystal Stars go back to the respective societies they were all rescued from, where they act as a microphone to communicate with Mario. Every character you meet, every friend you made, every town you visit starts cheering Mario and the partners on. All the relationships formed and all the wackiness encountered comes and helps. They all reflect on everything Mario had done for them. Whether saving their home, taking down their enemy, restoring their people, rescuing loved ones, they all remember and they all show support. The support disables the Shadow Queen and empowers Mario. The character of the game gets you through the final boss. I spent a little bit of time in that whole character spiel talking about the game's narrative, and that's because the characters drive the narrative. It literally starts with character motivations. Beldam disguising herself as Peach to have the map which signals Mario, the X-Nauts wanting to take over the world, Koops wanting to get back at Hooktail, Punio wanting to save his home, Jolene wanting to rescue her brother. I could go on. Almost nothing is contrived except for the delivery of Bobby's letter from Scarlet, or rather, why it was withheld from him. But when nothing's contrived, everything feels more real. The narrative on its own might be a tad hit or miss, but the fun of it comes in the characters. No one is boring and almost nothing is forced. I'm not sure if I need to comment on the crystal stars themselves, the 7 MacGuffins you need to get the big door open. That's basically the same as the first game, but the game makes you walk back to the door between every chapter, which helps centralize the focus, even if it gets a tad tiring to do the walk over and over. And I'd say that if anything, the reason I haven't commented too much on the crystal stars themselves is because they just seem so secondary. They drive the overarching plot, but I find the chapter plot's probably a little bit more memorable, if that makes sense. Now, I did spend a bit of time wondering if the character of the game added to why it's so slow in its pacing. After all, characters expressing themselves require cutscenes some of the time, and there are times where entire side narratives could be cut with minimal changes to the overall game. But most of the problems are related to backtracking and movement. Backtracking can be fixed with level design, and movement can be fixed with a speed increase. It doesn't affect the overall narrative or the characters, but there was a part of me that always felt like the character of the game did strongly affect how slow the game was. I believe the reason why is because the more offensive stuff like slow movement and backtracking made whatever minor offenses given by the character and narrative exponentially larger. It's pretty much just how I see it kind of thing that really, when you think about it, isn't entirely accurate. One thing that I've noticed as writing this video is that while the expansion of mechanics from the Nintendo 64 game to this one were present, it was a tad small. I won't say too small, it was actually fairly moderate, but I have seen other sequels do more, while a lot of extra work that would have gone into this stuff went into the world building and writing. None of this is bad, of course. The character and the narrative are the crux of the game. If it was mechanically identical but uninteresting characters and story beats, it would be nothing more than walk, fight a battle with fairly good mechanics. The game's character and how they're presented are the best reason I have to come back to this game. But that brings to light a question. Why have I come back to it so few times? Not to mention that every time I have come back to it has been because of hat-wearing gamer. The first thought I had might have been my adulthood. If I recall correctly, this was the second game I started playing for the first time as an adult, the first being Super Mario Galaxy 2. However, Galaxy 2 itself and a few other games I played for the first time when I was ages 18 and 19 have also been games that I occasionally like to come back to. Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 to name a few. So I don't think that's the case, but what I've also noticed is this. My favourite part of this game, being the character, can be enjoyed to a degree without even playing the game. I think that sheds light on why I've played it as many times as I have. I've appreciated this game many times through watching Let's Plays, video essays, interviews, discussions all about the game. Playing it just made me feel its pacing. As I watch Mario walk at 2 kilometers an hour, I can feel the GameCube analog stick denting into my thumb. My brain melting, my face tilting as I contemplate life and everything that led up to this walk back through the Twilight Passage. It might be small, but as I said at the start, it's all over the game. I did say at the end of the Nintendo 64 video that things are stepped up here, and they are, but the speed and pacing significantly pull it back for me. And while I think the character is amazing and mostly makes up for it, but the character itself isn't the part that you play, if that makes sense. What that means is that I oftentimes appreciate Thousand Year Door from a distance. I love the game, but replaying it through doesn't thrill me in quite the way replaying through an action platformer would. It's for this reason that between the Nintendo 64 game and this one, I can't decide which one I like better. They both stand amazingly for their own reasons, and I can't pick between the two. Thousand Year Door's character is its greatest asset, and I cannot stress that enough, but its fumbles mean that I can't love it more than the Nintendo 64 game, but instead, equally. Now, if you thought that was controversial, I hope you stick around for the next video in this series where I look at the most controversial and divisive game in the Paper Mario series. Super Paper Mario for the Wii. And yes, it actually is both controversial and divisive. I'm Hat Wearing Gamer, and this has been Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Before I say anything, I'm just a little bit congested at the moment, so please bear with me. I also just kind of want to get this video out and not have to wait until I'm a little bit better. Anyway, woo! It only took 2 years. I'd say that's a record. You know, it's not a great kind of record, but it's a record nonetheless. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, it's been, yeah, so it has been a while. I have been very, very busy. Well, the big thing is that I met a lovely young woman, and I fell in love with her, and we got married. So that's really exciting, even though the wedding was really quite recent. In fact, as of recording this, it was less than, well, only by a few days, but less than a month ago. But damn, yeah, so Thousand Year Door, I finally got it out. I finally finished this video after such a long time. Because, like, I remember 2 years ago, it's 2 years ago when I was recording this playthrough, and now I'm finally finished with the whole editing thing. It took me, like, I've been editing this since, like, early 2023. So yeah, that's just been a big thing that I've been doing a lot, very slowly over the last, how long? 18 months or so? And yeah, here we are. I'm finally here. I've done it! I've done it! I've done it! Yes. What's coming next? I don't know if I really want to reveal it. I do know what I want to do next. It's in light of something that came out last year, and how different it is to its predecessors. I'll leave you with that. If you want to, like, guess and speculate, go have fun doing that. I'm going to go and sit down and just relax for a bit, and then I'll hop into my next video when I can. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you later.